It's the much anticipated sequel to what many consider the greatest Spider-Man movie of all time. So does Across the Spider-Verse live up to the hype and deliver, or does it run out of web fluid? Let's find out together as the Byword starts now. Welcome, friends, to episode 154 of the Nerd Byword, the only podcast that doesn't still hold a candle for characters that peaked in the 90s and have been largely irrelevant since. Before we get to our review of Across the Spider-Verse, the film that has captivated the attention and hearts of audiences around the globe, it's time to stop by the newsroom for some more Nerd News! Dave, what's new, pussycat?
Whoa. It turns out that, the world of comic books journalism is just continuously taking hit after hit. We joked on this show and on social media quite a bit about some of the flubs and weird articles that CBR, formerly Comic Book Resources, has been publishing over the years. And I don't think that's going to get any better. Now, I want to go on a record before I talk about this news story as saying that I used to really, really love Comic Book Resources before it got bought up by Valnet, I think is the name of the company. I thought it was always a really, really good, very strong comic book news site. You had, several industry professionals that were writing columns there. I recall, for example, Tilting at Windmills. There was really, really good content there. The reviews were on point. The interviews were very strong. It was just a fun comic book website for a very long time. And then it got bought up by this publisher, Valnet, and, things shifted pretty dramatically. A lot of the industry insider columns and reviews started going to the wayside. A lot of the comic book content specifically started going to the wayside. And instead we got more, pop culture stuff, a lot of listicle articles, very short news pieces, reactions to news, which I don't really care much about, to be honest with you. And so the site has been on a downhill trajectory, regrettably, although it is still one of the most trafficked comic book related websites on the net. So that brings us to last month on Memorial Day, when Valnet decided to lay off 3/4 of its editorial team of CBR.com. Adam Swiderski, Stephen Girding, and Christopher Baggett were all told in one-on-one meetings, apparently, that they are being laid off. There's now only one individual so far, left on the editorial team. I think it's also very telling that CBR has continued to kind of push things out as it is. They are hiring. They have several jobs listed on Indeed.com, including news editor for TV and movies weekend news writer, and list writer. And all the positions are listed as freelance. The editor position is listed as part-time, but requires to edit and write a minimum of 10 news articles daily, which does not really sound like a part-time job to me, but whatever, Valnet, right? And there's a lot of whispering back and forth about why this exactly occurred, with Valnet making a very odd statement saying that it was undergoing major structural changes related to turning the corner on both culture and performance. Which is interesting, the culture note. So obviously a lot of people have been trying to dig into what exactly the culture problem was at CBR. And according to a report from thepopverse.com, one source told the site that the culture problem to Valnet is that they don't want people disagreeing with them in the least, and they will not flex or bend on anything. And a lot of the contributors of CBR have actually been talking rather positively about the 3 laid off editors. It appears from an outsider's perspective looking in that once again, Valnet is kind of chasing the quick buck and the lowest common denominator. And you can kind of see that in the more recent trajectory of the website. And I think we're going to see them probably further stepping away from, interviews and reviews and more towards these, short news reaction snippets, and less comic book media and more pop culture focused. So I think we're seeing the continued decline here of what used to be comic book resources, which was frankly my favorite comic book website for many, many years. So that is a sad story and a sad state, I think, for comic book related journalism, just for the fact that there isn't really anything that has very clearly and decisively stepped into this space, and created a similar space. Basically the online version of Wizard Magazine, something that previews material, does serious interviews, has columns. Like, this kind of stuff doesn't really exist in a large, clearly, spread way across the net. And I think that's incredibly regrettable, Kris.
Yeah. I didn't have the relationship with CBR, or I haven't, and even still, that you do. The one that I typically went to was comicbook.com, and you can kind of read the tea leaves there as well. It's a very similar situation where there's still good material that I can get from comicbook.com. Now, they were bought out. I don't know if they were bought out, but I know that they're a subsidiary now of Viacom, like CBS, Paramount, all that jazz. So like you can see clear. You can see at the end of every 2-paragraph article that it's pretty clear what the direction is there, and so there's still stuff, good stuff that I get from comicbook.com for for like our news stories as like a jumping on point, but then I typically have to do like further research myself because, well, as you said, it's 2 paragraphs, it's a super short article, it's clickbait. What are you going to do with that? But even comicbook.com in recent years has kind of experienced a similar, I don't know, whatever evolution into what it is now. And you're getting headlines on comicbook.com about Taco Bell menu changes and things of that nature. So I'm just like scratching my head. There are a few like small name kind of, I guess, indie kind of sites that I enjoy. Comics Beat is one that I read like a little blurb for. It is pretty good. Has columns and things of that nature. AIPT does great stuff with like creator interviews. They have X-Men Monday for me in particular, where they interview creatives and editorial and stuff like that. And then Comics XF also does good stuff. And there are a couple of small things in there, but you're very much correct in like the culture has changed. In the not the advent, but like with the internet and the blogosphere, and it's just like there's so many of us that are terminally almost online that it's just kind of, it's like the wild west of the internet at this point. But those are a few that I kind of go to for kind of ingenuity and like real creative work in the medium. Now, I'm not here to break down the economics of that. Those folks are probably all freelance, and doing that stuff in their spare time. I was riding with you when you said 10 articles, but I thought we were going to go per week, and I was like, okay, that's okay, but per day, that's insanity.
Now you can tell that it is very much quantity over quality, because how much, especially on a part-time basis, how many good, strong articles can somebody write in a single day? 10 is definitely not the number. So as somebody who's worked, for example, with student writers a lot on publications, this kind of stuff takes time, and if you want quality, it takes time. So this is the fast food of comics journalism at this point, I think. And then it does not taste good.
Yeah, and I think like for me, just if the length and the breadth of your quote unquote news story can be summarized in one Twitter post, it's not an entire news story. I'm sorry. Like great, that new toy that was released, it looks fantastic. Not a whole lot to write about. Just post a picture of it and a little blurb and you're good.
Yeah, that's exactly right. All right, Chris. So I don't know how much I can say about this because I've not seen the movie, but I'm very interested to see what your news story is here.
Okay, so as you mentioned at the time of recording, I have seen The Flash, and you have not. And we're also here to review Across the Spider-Verse. So, keep our food separated. I'm not going to divulge too much into my reaction here. We're not here to review The Flash. However, it is important, I think, to discuss some of the troubling headlines that are accompanying the film's release for a movie that's been mired in controversy since nearly its inception. So I'm going to try to go in chronological order here, but hey, it's a Flash story, so what the F does that even mean? Um, so a few days before the film was even released to theaters, scenes from the film's climax were leaked to social media, and the response was less than stellar. I'm going to try to remain spoiler-free here. I will say that beloved versions of DC characters from the past were constructed using CGI that made Rogue One's Governor Tarkin and Princess Leia look like a Renaissance-era masterpiece. I suddenly was stricken with nostalgic pangs for my PlayStation 1 for some reason, looking at those graphics. These frighteningly flawed renderings were ill-fated to be immediately destroyed in a clashing of universes. In talking with you, Dave, DC is certainly no stranger to this plot point, collision of universes, but fellow Marvel fans, we know them as incursions. The poor CGI throughout the film as well has drawn widespread criticism, to which director Andy Muschietti responded, quote, "The idea, of course, is we are in the perspective of the Flash. Everything is distorted in terms of lights and textures. We enter this water world, which is basically being in Barry's POV. It was part of the design, so if it looks a little weird to you, that was intended," end quote. Hit number 2. According to MovieWeb, the film opened at just $24.5 million, about $2 million behind Black Adam, which was widely regarded as a box office bomb. This obviously does not bode well as a send-off to this initial interpretation of the DCEU. And then finally, eagle-eyed moviegoers spotted an egregious omission from the special thanks portion of the credits, as legendary comic book writer Mark Waid was left out of the section. Waid, even as an outsider, I know, is widely regarded to be the definitive Flash writer, albeit for the character of Wally West in place of Barry Allen, but do we really believe this is Barry Allen in name? Anyways, as Waid worked on the book from 1992 to 2000 and briefly again in 2007, fellow legendary scribe Gail Simone posted the following statement on social media, quote, "Okay, I love the Flash movie, but is it really even possible that Mark Waid was not credited or is not credited for being the most influential Flash writer in the modern era? I don't know if that's a rumor or a true fact, but if it's true, that is a massive error. Mark's work is all over that movie. Lots of us are Flash fans to this day because of his work on DC Speedsters. This is just baffling," end quote. And I did some research and saw actual photos from the end credits, and Mark Waid's name is not there, according to what I saw. Dave, it's almost intentional at this point. Are we being punked?
You know what? So as you said, I've not seen the movie. It is on my to-do list. Obviously, I'm gonna be checking it out. Positive or negative reaction, be darned. Some train wrecks you just have to see for yourself, I guess. So I'm gonna be watching it here soon. However, I do wanna go ahead and put like a spoiler alert in effect, because I did see online, I ran straight into it, the much sort of ballyhooed cameo scene. And I do want to take a moment to talk about that in particular, just because, as you said, it is very reminiscent of a PlayStation 1, or PS2 cutscene. However, there is something deeply uncomfortable about this one. And that is specifically because, and again, spoiler alert here, because of the Chris Reeve cameo as Superman. First of all, I think they could have used a cardboard cutout and it would have looked better. Because it looks almost like a cardboard cutout. There's like no expressiveness on the face. He doesn't really move. He like has this very slight head movement at one point, and then the camera sort of zooms around him, and that's it. And then it looks, based on the footage I saw online, like immediately after they show him standing there, or a very, very horrible CGI version of him, immediately like his planet gets destroyed. So we took one of the most beloved DC Comics actors who has sadly passed away, resurrect him for this movie, only to immediately drop a planet on him and kill him. And I just think there's something really in just absolutely bad taste here. like this feels so out of, I don't know, man. Maybe in the context of the movie, it's better. I don't know. But just seeing the clip, it made me feel really, really icky just to see that. And I wished, as much as I am nostalgic for Chris Reeves' performance as Superman, I wish they would have left well enough alone there, because there was absolutely, it doesn't seem to me, at least, like there was any care put into that particular special effect. It doesn't seem particularly special. And to then take the effort of trying to quote unquote resurrect this actor for this role, and then immediately like, oh, and by the way, we just smashed him and he's dead. It's just a very, very weird choice to make. So I did not find that to be in good taste in any way, shape, or form. I also have to laugh a little bit about the hoopla about Jay Garrick. I don't know if you caught on to any of that.
I did.
So the long and short of it is that there's a brief shot of a young Jay Garrick in the movie as part of these cameos. The problem is that young Jay Garrick here looks strangely like actor Teddy Sears. Now, for those of you that might remember the earlier seasons of The Flash, I think this might have been season 2 or 3, Teddy Sears actually appeared as what was supposed to be Jay Garrick, only turns out it wasn't actually really Jay Garrick. It was actually the supervillain Zoom posing as Jay Garrick. And 90s Flash actor John Wesley Shipp was eventually introduced as the real Jay Garrick. Now, so first of all, you have a whole bunch of fans wondering why in the world they're using Teddy Sears as Jay Garrick when he played not Jay Garrick very specifically in the Flash TV show. But then the plot thickened when Teddy Sears was interviewed, and he said, listen, I got a newborn at home right now. I know I'm a little sleep deprived, but I don't remember doing anything for this movie. And so now the rumors are swirling. Did they CG him and weren't really aware of the fact that he wasn't really playing Jay Garrick? There's some rumors going around that they actually tried to make it John Wesley Shipp at de-age, but it doesn't really look like John Wesley Shipp. Like, this whole cameo scene is just a special effects poop show. Where you can't even quite tell what they were trying to do with it, apparently. This 1 2-minute clip that I saw online has probably done more to make me crestfallen about this movie than anything else. I am very much somebody who will rise to the nostalgia bait, and I will say that a part of me is very excited to see Michael Keaton in the role of Batman again, even though he is, an old guy. And that's not even my favorite version of Batman necessarily. But there is a certain amount of nostalgia to that, especially since Batman the Animated Series really, in a lot of ways, grew out of Batman '89, And so I have nostalgia for this, and I will freely admit there was a part of me that's excited for this. But I don't know what they were going for with this particular scene. It's icky. It's icky in a lot of ways, Chris.
Dude, you buried the lead because you saw it. Speaking of 90s DC movies, we got something that should have been momentous and eventful and unifying as a fandom. We got Nicolas Cage Superman, but it was such a crap rendering.
Yeah, another like, PlayStation 2 scene.
It doesn't mean anything. Like, that could have been so cool, and it's just so okay. I'm gonna have to cut myself off because I have so much to react to this movie that I need to save for possibly our next episode when you see the movie.
Okay, well, I will say this, and I think it needs to be said. The only good thing about that whole scene was that Nicolas Cage Superman was fighting a giant spider.
It was so awesome. It just looked like crap.
Yeah, it was the most clever thing, considering the whole, Kevin Smith story about John Peters and everything. Like it was about as perfect as you can get if they would have just gotten the effect right. And I'm a fan of the director. I mean, this is the guy who directed it, right? I mean, there's a lot of talent behind this individual, but I don't think From what I've seen from trailer shots and a little bit of leaked footage that popped up online here and there, it looks like the movie is well directed. It almost feels like he had all these epic shots in mind, and then the special effects never came through. And I don't know if this has to do with crunch. There's always a lot of special effects crunch on these big blockbuster movies, and they don't get the special effects guys don't get the time they need to finish it, or if there was like they got cut off on money because of the transition and with WB and everything. I don't know what happened there, but it feels like from the director perspective, like he was really trying, and then the effects just never came through. And to come out and say, well, it's supposed to look weird, dude, you don't make the choice to make Chris Reeves look weird and unrealistic when you're trying to go for a nostalgia fueled, adrenaline shot, right? You want him to look as real and realistic as possible so people buy that he's actually there. And nobody bought that scene. Nobody.
It's just a troubling trend that we have with DC films, and I hope that it dies with this first iteration of the DCEU. It's almost DC's calling card is crappy CGI, and I hope that we can evolve into something else in this new vision of the universe. I'm just, like I said, I don't want to get too deep into it.
Well, I will also say this, and I'm a much bigger DC fan than a Marvel fan. But you know what? Anybody else that starts from the DC side saying, Marvel has crappy CGI because of She-Hulk or something, dude, come at me, okay? She-Hulk looked actually like she was there. Let's talk about She-Hulk versus Chris Reeves for a second. That's absolutely disgusting. Anyways.
More on that possibly next episode if we can get Dave to watch this movie. Although, I don't know, maybe it's just the DC fandom, because why would you want to at this point?
You finally got me watching Lower Decks. That's what I've been doing. So,
are you kidding me? You did?
I'm six episodes in the first season right now.
God, yes. Okay. All right, I need to contain myself. So that wraps up Nerd News. Hit us with your reactions to The Flash. We're going to probably review it here coming up very soon. At Nerd Byword, Twitter and Instagram. When we come back from our first break, we are reviewing Across the Spider-Verse. Welcome back to the main segment. The reason we are gathered here today, dearly beloved, we are here to review Across the Spider-Verse in today's Byword Okay, now, this is going to be an atypical movie review, okay, because I saw this movie twice, and I had nary a dislike. So, we're going to talk about the things that we like, and Dave has a couple of nitpicks. And I desperately tried to come up with nitpicks, but we'll get there in a moment. So I have no dislikes for this film as it stands right now. Maybe something will come up, but I couldn't think of anything. So we're just going to launch right into the likes. Dave, what is your first like of Across the Spider-Verse?
Well, it's no secret here that obviously this is a Miles Morales movie, and well, it should be. And the character's fantastic. But I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about Gwen in this movie, because the movie opens with Gwen in sort of an extended opening sequence before we ever get to Miles. And that opening sequence runs for about 15 minutes or something. It goes for quite a while. And so Gwen was really the point that had to sort of captivate us into wanting to watch this movie. If you're going to put something out there and that's your opening, that's your hook, right? That's what's going to draw people in. And what drew people in here in this movie at the beginning was Gwen. And I have to say that entire opening sequence was absolutely fantastic. The drumming, the animation, her recap of her life and the kind of the emotional resonance of that, the conflict with her father. There's a lot of moving parts here that I found really, really interesting. And it almost felt like the first 15 minutes of this movie were sort of a pitch for a Spider-Woman solo movie starring Gwen Stacy. Like it was that strong and that good, to the point where I could have probably just kept watching that as a solo movie, and I would have been perfectly content as well. I think that's one of the interesting things we get out of the Spider-Verse movie in some ways, is that there are some characters that you almost feel like would lend themselves naturally to having a solo outing. And to me, Gwen absolutely does that. I found her arc in this movie to be less that of a supporting character and more like a co-lead. I think it's almost like her and Miles were co-leads.
You know what? You know what? It's almost like what Ant-Man and the Wasp should have been.
Yes, you're exactly right. And so you get a lot of arc for Miles in this movie, obviously, since he's sort of the advertised front and center protagonist. But Gwen goes through a really extensive and interesting arc as well in this movie. So I almost feel like she's co-lead at this point. And I really, really liked it. I thought that was a very, very smart choice because her character, I think, was a real interesting standout from the first one anyways. And so kind of reducing the Peter B. Parker role in this one and leaning more into the Gwen of it, I think was incredibly smart. She's just a very fascinating character. And I think in some ways more interesting than the comic book version. Now, don't get me wrong, I like comic Spider-Gwen. And I have read a fair amount of her comics, especially the first couple of runs. But I think here there's a very different resonance with the character that really, really works. So I think Gwen really, really shines in this movie as a character.
And you know what? I think for me, it really just boils down to something really simple. I think Haley Steinfeld is a superstar. I just can't speak enough to how magnetic she is as a star presence, even as a voice actress. We've talked about this time and again when we did Hawkeye. I mean, she's had audiences captivated since she was a child.
True Grit was incredible.
Oh my God. Like, I think she was 13 at the time. Just magnificent. Magnificent.
And carried that movie. I mean, no rip on Jeff Bridges or anything.
In a movie with Jeff Bridges and Matt Damon, she carried that movie.
Yep, absolutely.
And listen, there's a lot of discussion. There's a lot of discussion taking place, particularly with Gwen coming out of this movie, the trans allegory, the subtext versus the text arguments, from some of the worst people imaginable online, of transphobic, homophobic, commentary or what have you. And as two cisgendered straight white men, I'd feel, Dave, I don't know if I can speak for you, but it's not our place to make that judgment.
I will totally agree with that. And if you don't mind me saying this for a second, then I've said this online before. I just think it's something that needs to be said. As somebody who's written and published a few stories in my time, I think it's something that a lot of people don't understand. Fiction is not one-way communication, right? It's not an author putting down something and then the consumer consumes and that's it, right? It's not a stake, okay? Fiction, storytelling is a two-way street, right? In that on the one hand you have the author telling a story and with some intent behind it, sure. But on the other hand, you have then how the audience relates to that story. And every audience member relates to a movie or a novel or whatever, really fiction, in a unique way based on their own life experiences, right? So they react and interpret the fiction that they consume through the prism of their own life experiences, right? So in the particular case of Gwen Stacy, in this movie, when I watch this movie, do I relate to this character on a level of, I identify with her transness, for example? Well, absolutely not, because that is not the prism through which I, as a cracker straight guy, will view this character.
You're going to say that word, yeah.
However, Did I relate to the character in my own way? Certainly. I mean, there is something about being a teenager and having parental conflict and trying to establish yourself as your own person and your own individual, and at the same time not wanting to disappoint or let your parents down if you have some kind of strong or good relationship with them. That I can relate to. I think that is pretty universal. However, that is the prism through which I react to this character and through which I interpret the character. And I think saying that another person's reaction to the character or interpretation of the character is invalid is incredibly tone deaf to how fiction works. Fiction is interpretive. I mean, how often do you have authors coming out and saying something about a particular character that they wrote or a particular story that they wrote, and the audience goes, "Do what? That's not what we felt at all." I think there's a lot to be said for example. Here's, I think, a really good example is the whole ongoing J.K. Rowling issue, right? The whole controversy surrounding some of her statement towards trans people, right? And then you look at the books, and there is some very questionable stuff in there, but then there is also an ongoing subplot across several books regarding house elves and the enslavement of house elves, and how Hermione, who is held up as one of the heroes of the story, is very actively trying to end the practice of enslaving house elves, right? And this is held up as a good thing. This is held up as, she is a hero and she is in the moral right. And so from an audience perspective, oftentimes, because of that subplot, there is, Harry Potter stories are, pro minority rights, not suppressing people, not, enslaving people, not, everybody's equal, right? And so then J.K. Rowling coming out and saying some of the things she has about trans made people feel uncomfortable exactly because of that, because the audience interpretation went one way when perhaps the authorial intent went another way. So again, I think what we all need to realize is that everybody views fiction through their own lens, and that doesn't mean that they are quote unquote wrong. It is their own lens and their own life experiences that color how they perceive a character or a story in fiction, period.
Yeah, and I sent this to you while we were discussing it privately, but I always go back to, like, what more could we say about Mark Hamill? I mean, my God. But he was asking a question, answering a question about the possibility of Luke Skywalker being gay. And I'm going to quote here. He said, quote, "Fans will say, I'm getting bullied at school. I'm afraid to come out because my parents are religious and they'll hate me. It just breaks your heart." And they would say to me, "Could Luke be gay?" And I might get emotional reading this. And I would say, it's meant to be interpreted by you. If you think he's gay, of course he's gay. And I kind of had a different viewing experience, as a father to queer children, to a transgendered child, and kind of seeing that journey for Gwen. It was just a really beautiful experience. And almost like a cautionary tale for me as a parent, as I have a wide spectrum when it comes to age range of children. So I have some who are already teenagers. I have some who are coming into becoming teenagers, and I have some who are still elementary age. And so it's just almost just like a quick reminder of, like, how can I support my kids the most? And I truly believe that was just like a really emotional, impactful story between herself and her father. And, like, it was truly heartbreaking when he attempted to arrest her. Broke my heart. And I think, God, there's so much about that, because her entire world, her universe, and she said, Haley Steinfeld has said this in subsequent interviews, just like, it was the idea behind her universe is a mood ring. And I noticed it, especially on the second viewing, of her hair color changing. And the walls are bleeding or crying, and even, depending upon your interpretation. And then just being willing to just, and I'm going to get this on my first like, but it was just an emotional roller coaster for me. spending time in Gwen's universe.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's get into that then. Kris, what was your like of the movie?
This is a masterpiece. This is a visual masterpiece. And this is, I have, so many people, just general audience members have this anti-animation bias. Like everything has to be in live action. Like we are already seeing, oh, we need a live action Miles Morales. And I don't know that we do. I don't know that we need a live action Miles Morales. I think it would feel cheap. I think it'll feel like the Dollar General version of the character. Like it, I think it cheapens what we've already been gifted this. And what I love about it is I titled it The Ambition of the Animation. Like they just went for it. They took a risk. Like we already talked about briefly Gwen's universe and the mood ring nature of it and the colors blending and bleeding together. We haven't even got to the star of the show that has been a skyrocketing superstar out of this. We haven't gotten to Hobie Brown, Spider-Punk. That animation alone is just a visual feast. It's almost like they truly embrace, well, first and foremost, they truly embrace that like punk aesthetic, the punk rock aesthetic, particularly of like the UK punk rock. And then how do you tie that into animation where it's almost like magazine cutouts, and his animation is like jittery and it goes from black and white to full color. It's just mesmerizing. The things that they're able to do, the ambition of this animation is truly mesmerizing. For God's sake, we had Lego Spider-Man. Like, come on.
Hey, he's one of our best.
He's Lego, yes, and that Lego Spider-Man is one of the most trusted people in this Spider Society or whatever moniker we're giving them. Like, it was just so fun to sit back in a theater chair and just bask in the glory of as a creative person, to just see creators cook. Like, it's almost like I'm in the kitchen with like Gordon Ramsay or Wolfgang Puck or like one of the industry giants, or like I feel like Anthony Bourdain, God rest him, like was one of those people as a culture and as a food nerd. I just like, I was enraptured in every episode when he would travel the world and all these places I'm dying to go to, and be in the kitchen with some of these people in their own homes. And that's how I felt watching this film.
See, that's fascinating. The animation in this movie is a whole nother level. I don't think we can fault anything animation style in this movie in any way, shape, or form. It is one of the most kinetic animation styles I think I've ever seen. It is one of the most interesting because it's so experimental, because they really leaned into the idea of a multiverse, that every universe is truly unique visually, that they were able to do some incredible stuff. I think that opening sequence with Gwen already perfectly set the tone with that like Leonardo da Vinci style vulture.
Oh my God, when I saw Renaissance da Vinci style vulture, I was just like, oh, we're going there in the first 10 minutes of the film. Oh, we're doing this? Buckle up.
Yeah, it was absolutely incredible. Like, and I think that's something regrettably that the comic books, when they play with multiverses, has never really done, which is to give each universe a really distinct art style and really just kind of like bounce around the art a little bit, and everything looks pretty homogenous, I guess is the best way to put it. If you put a bunch of Spider-Men, for example, in the Spider-Verse, in the original Spider-Verse comic book story next to each other, that artistically they're pretty much all the same. There's some variations in costume.
The only ones where you get that kind of variation, believe it or not, is Spider-Ham, where they're just like, what if we made Meows Morales? What if we made him a cat? Like, that's where they get the most adventurous. The frustrating part with it for so much of Spider-Verse comics is how can we tell this story from Peter Parker's perspective 1,000 different times? I'm like, come on.
The thing is ultimately that it should not be that animation is showing up comic books when it comes to art. Like they should lean into these kinds of ideas in the comic books to begin with, right? But yeah, this animation and just the variations in animation from universe to universe and the way they play with color. This movie is a work of art.
All right, so behind the curtain, we are recording this on Father's Day, and saps like you and I, Dave, are going to fall for this bait every single time.
Every single time, yeah. I mean, this is a movie that is ostensibly about family in a pretty much every way, shape, or form. Every character that really matters to the plot of this movie has something going on with their family, right? You know, Miles doesn't want to disappoint his parents, and then is ultimately on a mission to try to save his father. Gwen and her relationship with her father, we've spoken, about quite a bit. Peter B. Parker now is a father himself, and that kind of colors his whole experience in this movie. Even Miguel, who is not the villain, but I would argue with the antagonist of this movie.
Yes.
Even Miguel, his entire reason for being who he is in this movie is because he lost a family. Right? So this is very much a movie that is clearly thematically anchored across the board for all major characters in the notion of what it means to be family and what we do for the people that we love. And I think that is one of the rarest things these days, particularly in superhero movies, is that there is a strong through line that hits all the major characters in some way. That's just good thematic writing. And I love that here. I'm a family kind of guy anyways. I love stories that focus on the notion of family and what it means to be a family and what we owe each other as family. Those sorts of things, resonate with me. And so having this as a through line in this movie, I thought was incredibly smart and worked incredibly well, Chris.
And I'm gonna put a DLC on that, an expansion pack to your like, if you will. I love the cultural authenticity of this film. And it's something that I think the Ms. Marvel Disney Plus series just absolutely nailed. While I may be a honky in every respect of the term, I'm blessed and fortunate to have a very diverse upbringing. I was raised by my stepfather, who I consider to be my father, as who's a black man. I studied the Spanish language and Latine culture, and so I've spent time with large parts of the Latine community, with the black community, and it's not my place to comment on that because that's not my culture, not my experience. But seeing people from those backgrounds echo sentiments of this is an accurate representation. The one meme that I sent you, Dave, and even though we are white, it would get the same response in our household. The reason that I know Gwen Stacy is a white girl from a white household is she put her shoes on someone else's bed.
Holy crap! Yeah, as somebody who grew up in Germany, I can tell you that crap would not have flown in our house either.
She would have flown out the window.
My grandmother would not have appreciated that in any way, shape, or form. There would have been some serious words, maybe a cooking spoon flying through the house. I mean, it's just not a pretty picture.
And something that growing up immersed in Black culture as I was, the first thing that resonated with me, and I would be mortified. I still have, to this day, don't use parents' first names. But when she calls the parents, Miles's parents, by their first name, I was like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. My dad would flip. It's just so, I feel it. And, and having traveled to New York frequently, like it feels like an accurate representation of Brooklyn and New York as well. And that's just a beautiful kind of cultural snapshot, if you will.
Yeah, somebody did their homework is what we're saying here, right? And it's very, very clear that they did. All right, Chris, so what is your next like for this movie?
All right, so I'm going to credit our dear friend Ash from X of Words, but he made this observation in a group chat that I was in. The metatextual messaging of this film, the first one that I'm going to attribute to him is like a crippling kind of storyline, being the great arch nemesis. Like the real villain of this movie is Spider-Man has to go through these canon events, and that being and we could do nothing to interrupt that, as being like the big bad of this movie, is just so meta contextual, just bliss. And then furthermore, on the meta context of this film and the directors and everybody behind the scenes, like immediately admitted this as like the whole conversation around Miles being an anomaly, an abomination, like he does not deserve to wear the mask and all this stuff. That was from the director's perspective. Sorry for Miguel for having to envision that, and a lot of people are casting shots, rightfully so, at Miguel for being kind of the voice of that. But it was a very intentional message that the directors, the producers, and everyone involved made, that yes, Miles belongs here. And you can cast aspersions, you can do whatever you want to do, but Miles belongs here. And that is a very intentional message thematically throughout this film, was just a really beautiful thing to see brought into this movie.
I'll agree with that. I'll also say that to me, there is definitely something here about almost a rebuke of what's going on with comic books, generally speaking, with some of these characters, and I think we're going to see that much more clearly if the rest of the story kind of progresses the way it feels like it will. This notion of canon events, this notion of that these things have to happen, you have to have a story a certain way, or people will not, it will not resonate with them. I think they're going to very, very strongly and very clearly upend that in the third movie. And to me, that is very much a rebuke of business as usual as is happening in the comic books right now. I think that ultimately it comes down to be braver, be bolder, be experimental, which is what this movie oftentimes is with its animation in particular. And I think I don't want to open up the can of worms of talking about current Amazing Spider-Man, because you and I part ways there pretty strongly. But I think we can both agree at the very least that evolving characters and moving in a direction and changing things up and experimenting with the storytelling rather than stagnating is something that this movie firmly supports. And it's very clear in how the story is written.
And I think the one thing that you and I can definitely agree on is that Peter Parker and his trajectory in the comics is held captive by Marvel editorial, period, full stop. So any enjoyment that I have out of current Amazing Spider-Man, and for Marvel as a whole, honestly, is in spite of editorial and the constraints that they tried to place on their character. It's almost like, the old X-Men animated series where they put like the collars on it that like what do they call it? They like mute their mutant powers so they can't like use them or whatever. That's how I feel Marvel editorial is like handicapping their characters, and Peter Parker is look no further for a greater instance of that. So anything that I enjoy about Peter Parker's story and what the current title is doing is in spite of that.
Yeah, and I almost feel like the most heated, most interesting episode we could ever record would be a deep dive into the current run on Amazing Spider-Man.
It's funny you say that, because you really made me think of it earlier when you were talking about what we draw from fiction. I have a different interpretation of the current
That's exactly
story
right.
that's taking place because of the life experiences that I've lived. Of, we have this pie in the sky. The Ms. Marvel death notwithstanding, because that's an editorial overreach that's bullshit forevermore. But the kind of like star-crossed lovers vibe that they have between Mary Jane and Peter, like sometimes your soulmate doesn't work out. And I've lived that experience. And it's heartbreaking. It's heartrending. And so I get what they're going for from that. Now, is that the intended effect by the writer? I don't know. But I do know that Marvel editorial CB Cebulski said that that's not relatable to have Peter Parker be a married person or be in a long-term committed relationship. So maybe it's just a lucky byproduct of what's happening that I can relate to that story. But yeah, so anything that I enjoy out of that is in spite of Marvel editorial and the handcuffs that it places on some of the characters that I've loved since I was 6 years old. One thing I did want to say is you mentioned this, and again, I promise I do not want to spoil this movie or anything, but you were talking about like the influence of canon events and how we should be daring creators to be more ambitious and be more creative when it comes to these canon events. That was probably my biggest gripe with the Flash film. Is we talk about the advent of AI imaging. Some of that script felt like they dumped it into Chat GPT. Like there was no emotion behind it. Like it was like color by numbers. And that was probably my greatest frustration. Like I can get over bad CGI. For God's sake, I've seen bad CGIs in a DC movie since I can remember. But the more disappointing thing is like nothing really packed a punch. And that's what I'm, worried about when we continue to make comic book movies. Yes, it's great that as comic book nerds, like I never would have dreamed to be the state we're in. But what I love about these Spider-Verse films is that they're willing to kind of evolve and adapt. And I wish so many much more comic book movies would do the same.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think, I think if you look at something like something like Superman Lost, for example, which I'm going to talk about probably next week as my nerd commendation.
I'm dying to read that. How have I not read that yet?
Yeah, so the notion in that is basically that Superman gets like sucked in a black hole and then he spends like 20 years trying to make his way back home to Lois Lane. And you get in the story sort of like in flashbacks after he returns and he's kind of suffering through like the stresses of being gone that long and then trying to return to his normal life, because for him it's been 20 years and for her it's been like 2 hours or something. And so that is some bold storytelling, right? And it's not even in the regular comic books, right? It's a standalone miniseries, right? And that is problematic in its own way, because a story like that can absolutely work in the regular comic books. That's some bold storytelling,
I felt the same way with Spider-Man Life Story. Like bleep your sliding timescale. What if he aged like a real human being? That was fascinating.
That's exactly right, yeah.
Is that right, Ollie? All right, man. Let's hit up your final like for Across the Spider-Verse.
My final like is very simply that this movie loves Spider-Man. I think that really comes across in every single scene and every single version of Spider-Man that they put on the screen. I mean, we had Peter parked car, for crying out loud, right? There is such a deep love of the lore of Spider-Man, all the little obscure little things that have popped up in the comic books over the years. There is a love put into redesigning Spider-Man India, for example. There is just so much love for the character and for the worlds that writers in the comic books have created. And I think that love bleeds through in every single major scene. And so, to me, that is the real strength of the movie, besides the incredible animation. It's just the pure love of Spider-Man that is put on screen.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Like I saw this with my son, who's been that's one of our bonding experiences, is that we love Spider-Man. We regularly watch Spider-Man movies, as when he was growing up, and then he was shaking with excitement as we were like walking into the theater, and just being able to share that experience with him. That was a canon event for me, if you will. And it's just I'm going to go back to like the ambition and the creative notion, because like it's a freaking car. It's like the spider buggy or the spider car or what have you is like one of the like the inside jokes of like being one of the dumbest things to ever happen to Amazing Spider-Man comics, and they turned that into a persona. We got Spider Rex, we got a freaking cowboy Spider-Man, um, and then like being able to evolve past just one guy in every multiverse. I think that was finally like, yeah, you can make him a car, you can make him a cowboy, you can make him everything. But what if it's just a different person? Like, it doesn't have to be Peter every bleeping time. That's finally.
Yeah, I can't agree more. I wonder what the canon event of Peter Parker was. Did he lose his Uncle Bentley? I mean, like,
he got a ticket.
I think there's also, I think the canon event thing really we're going to see reevaluated very quickly in the third movie. I think that this is a gross oversimplification, in a lot of ways. I could get into that, but I think we're gonna probably maybe do an episode like right before the next one comes out, kind of speculating or something that might be interesting.
Yeah, placing our bets. Yep.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of really interesting groundwork laid here, and I don't think that this is going to go the way people think. I think there's some curveballs coming at us. Anyways, what is your final like of the movie, Chris?
Dude, everything about the new crew is captivating to me. I already loved the idea of Spider-Man India, and I'm going to butcher the pronunciation, but Pavitra Prabhakar, like South Asia as a whole, like geographically, culturally, religiously, linguistically, has been a fascination of mine. Particularly in recent years, with my falling in love with Kamala Khan. And so seeing them kind of evolve that suit, everything about that character was incredible. I mean, I will never look at Chai the same way again. And also, here's an Easter egg that I didn't catch on. Miles did the exact same thing with ATM. The machine is redundant, as is Chai Tea. Like, that's meta, man. That's huge. And then I've already like professed my love for Hobie Brown. Like, the fan art that's come out of this movie is just captivating and is just so fun. That's when you have a good movie, is when the World Wide Web, pun fully intended, is just bursting at the seams with fan art and imaginative, like, headcanon stuff. It's just so fun. But yeah, this whole new crew.
It's like I said at the beginning with Gwen. It almost feels like she could have her own movie very easily. I think a lot of the characters introduced in this could very easily carry their own movie, and that's when you have a strong story, right? When every character is interesting enough to go off and have their own adventures, then you're doing something right.
I mean, hate the AM, hate the PM. I hate consistency. Like, come on. Oh, man. And then, after the first viewing, I was just like, who is this Miguel O'Hara? Who is this a-hole? Like, here's the thing that bothered me after the first viewing, but now after the second viewing, I'm kind of fascinated. Maybe we'll get to your nitpicks here in a little bit. We'll discuss this in your nitpicks. The fascinating thing to me is Miguel is so obsessed with Miles being an anomaly, an aberration, or what have you, and he's going to screw up the multiverse and the sanctity of this. Homeboy went to another universe. How many universes did he destroy? Not just with disrupting one canon event, but living with a family that wasn't really his day after day after day. That's what I'm excited to watch that unfold and unpack that in the next film. The hypocrisy of one Miguel O'Hara pissed me off at first, but then at the second viewing, I was just like, that's actually fascinating. It's like him gatekeeping, and like everybody is just like under his servitude, like not under his servitude, but like under his command. Like everybody just like, Miguel says jump and they say how high, even if they want to rib him like Peter B does. Even as good a friend as Gwen wants to be, she's still having to listen to Miguel. Like, that's fascinating to me, and I can't wait to unpack that. And masterfully done by Oscar Isaac. I mean, like, what can't that guy do? My God. And somebody said put his buddy Pedro Pascal, like the internet's daddy, in this movie. Like, yep, count me in. I'm in. So I'm fascinated by this new crew, and Miguel frustrated me at first, but now I'm fascinated by like this a-hole. And I want an empanada. I don't want an empanada now.
And I have to say that there are some fans of Spider-Man 2099, which I never read that deeply, that were not that happy with this portrayal of Miguel. So I'm interested to see how they come full circle, because again, I don't think he's a villain here. He's an antagonist, but I don't think he's a villain, and I think we're going to further illuminate that character in the next one.
Okay, new Nerd by Word drinking game. Every time Dave rants about Ben Reilly, take a drink. We might be passed out very soon.
This is not a rant. Come on, man. So you as you said.
By the way, we're in Dave's nitpicks. If you hadn't guessed.
Yeah, so obviously Chris says he can't find any nitpicks, and this is a perfect movie. And while I agree that it is a near perfect movie, I'm a very nitpicky guy. As Chris has said many times, I grade a lot harder than him when it comes to school assignments as well. So,
they come to my class crying. No, I'm just kidding.
I wouldn't be surprised. I would not be surprised. So a few things. First of all, my first nitpick does focus on Ben Reilly, although I don't think it's nearly what you think it's going to be here. I thought it was visually very cool how they showed him. It definitely felt sort of like a 90s comic book. I don't think the choice of using him as the poster child for 90s angst in comics was necessarily the right step. And the reason for that is that that's not what he represented in the comics at the time when he was introduced. I mean, was there a little bit like, oh, I'm a clone, I'm angsty kind of thing? There was a little bit of that. But at the time of the Clone Saga and the Spider-Man comic books, it was Peter Parker who was the angsty one, right? Peter Parker was going through it. And Peter Parker had been so traumatized, he was running around calling himself just the Spider. He's no longer Peter Parker. He's just the Spider. He's giving up being Peter Parker and all this crap. And so Ben was actually a return to the light-hearted, quippy Spider-Man that had not been seen in Marvel Comics for quite a while at that point. So it seems almost like an inversion of what Ben was in the comic books. Now, if they wanted to do 90s edge, I thought it would have been much cooler to use Kane, because although Kane as a character was redeemed in his own Scarlet Spider.
Oh my God, yeah. I love Kane.
Yeah, but he was redeemed in his own Scarlet Spider run later on. If you're looking at the actual 90s and the Clone Saga, this was the 90s angst. Kane was the 90s edge, not Ben. Ben was more classic Peter Parker than Peter Parker was even at the time. And so that felt like an odd choice for me. And it's not like that far out of the left field to have Kane even included in the movie. The only scene where I thought that the Ben's shtick worked perfectly is when he goes into the alley at the end of the movie and he's narrating, because that felt exactly like 90s comic book caption box narration, right? But the rest of it, I felt like Kane would have been a much better choice to represent the super angsty 90s. I mean, this is the failed clone that's scarred, and he's constantly, I hate everybody because they're
that may have been too deep a cut, though.
I don't know, but well then, take that version of Kane and put him in his Scarlet Spider suit or something. You know what I mean? Like, I think there would have been a better representation of what the character represented in the comics and what they did here.
I'm so 50-50, and we talked about this, I think it was one of your news stories a couple episodes back when Andy Samberg was revealed to be the voice actor. I'm so 50-50 on him, but God, he nailed it here. Even if you disagree with the interpretation, he absolutely, whatever the assignment he was given, he chewed that crap up. Like, he was.
I totally agree.
Oh my god! Like when he was like standing there in like the catcher's squat on top of the roof, like oh yeah, it was great. But okay. You congratulations, you surprised me because I thought we were going in a very different direction. But yeah, I would love anytime that I get Kane content. I'm sorry, just Kane is like Frankenstein's monster is just much more fascinating to me than Ben Reilly is Peter's clone with blonde highlights. Never saw it for Ben. Never saw it for him, and I never will. But Kane, you give me Kane in the film, just shut up and take my money.
All right, so my second nitpick, and this really is a nitpick. I didn't 100% like that the climax of the movie, the main fight in the movie, was the spiders versus Miles, because I think it really distracted from the. Okay, so when we get to the cliffhanger part, the cliffhanger is that Miles is stuck in the wrong universe, and the Spot is gonna go and kill his father, right? He's gonna go and kill everybody that he loves, and so what we get is we get Miles stuck in this other universe. We get a very, very brief shot of the Spot reappearing in Miles's universe, and then we get the shot of like the new crew that's going to come and try to help Miles, and that's great. But I think almost the confrontation that the spiders have with the Spot at the end of the second act would have been almost more fun to have at the end of the third act, because it leaves the audience with a much more urgent threat from Spot towards Miles's family. So you could have almost pasted like you have the big confrontation with all the spiders, right? At the end of the second act, and then Miles is going after Spot instead of trying to go home and like protect his dad. He's going to go directly after Spot and try to prevent him from getting all these, going in the collider and getting this extra power, right? And then you have your climax there where you have that big fight. And then the Spot basically shunts Miles aside and goes and says, "Now I'm going to kill your dad." And you leave the audience with a much clearer cliffhanger, a much more urgent, I think, cliffhanger of the Spot is going to, go and hurt Miles's family. I think that almost was by that point an afterthought. It's like something bad is going to happen to Miles's dad. But it was not so much. The threat is the Spot. So I almost felt like the way they did the climax diminished the threat of the Spot just a little bit by making it feel less urgent. It felt very abstract when Miles was fighting all the spiders. It's like, I have to go and save my dad. Well, you have to go and save your dad from the Spot, but we've kind of like shunted the notion of the Spot aside a little bit at this point for this ginormous, showdown with Miguel, who's not the villain of the story, but he's an antagonist. But the villain is the Spot. So for me, I wished we would have had something that gave it a little more urgency towards the Spot as a threat at the end. And again, that's a nitpick. It works the way it was done too, but I would have liked a little more sense of urgency when it comes to the Spot at the end of the movie.
I don't disagree. I think we could have easily amended that with like a post-credit scene, which surprisingly this movie did not have. I think a post-credit scene of like him like on his way to go kill his father or him doing something, I think that could have taken care of that. I am a massive fan of taking a D-list villain and making them a terrifying adversary. Like, I may be mistaken in this, and spider historians help me. I think he just showed up as like maybe not a one-off, but maybe a 2 or 3 off villain in like the B book, like Spectacular Spider-Man, the backup title, and like taking like this laughable villain, which Spider-Man has no shortage of. No, all apologies to the Kangaroo and to Grizzly, and Nick Spencer tried his darndest with some of those, but yeah, so taking the character like the Spot and making him like this big bad, and that Act 2 scene was legitimately terrifying. And they were, again, predictably creative with the animation and everything. So yeah, I see where you're going. And I think at least an end credit scene could have kind of whetted our appetites to revisit that character in the third film.
All right. This is going shockingly smooth between us. Let's see how this last nitpick goes. So much has been debated online about whether some of these characters would go along with Miguel as far as like telling people that they need to let their loved ones die, right? Um, and I'm kind of conflicted on that particular issue, because we're looking at the full breadth of the entire multiverse, right? And you have in some of these shots, it looks like hundreds, if not thousands, of different spider people. It is sometimes difficult to imagine that there is not a one in that crew that would not stand up and question the notion of letting people's loved ones die, even for the greater good. Like there's always been something about Spider-Man as a character that is the person that won't lay down, the person that will not quit, the person that keeps on pushing. I mean, looking at something like, nothing can stop the Juggernaut, for example, right? That is in the
God. Oh, that's a deep cut. I love you for that. Love
you. So there, I think the never quit, never say die is so baked into the character to then have literally, let's say, 1,000 variations of that character, and not a single one stands up and says, this is kind of questionable. Feels weird. We don't know how long the structure of Miguel in charge of all these spider people has gone on. We don't know how we don't know how he selected the people that are there. Maybe he was incredibly selective with who he included, specifically avoiding people that he think would try to stand against him. I don't know. But there is something that rings overly simplistic almost to say that there is no discontent in the ranks. Even having a scene where he tries to recruit somebody, a spider person from another universe, and that person says, you want me to go and let people die, I'm not going to do that, or something, would have maybe taken the edge off that a little bit. It just feels... It's difficult for me to believe that in thousands of Spider-Man variations that Miles is the only one that would stand up and say, no, I'm not okay with somebody that I love dying. It's very Star Trek 2, Star Trek 3, the whole like the needs of the many versus the needs of the one. And Star Trek ultimately comes down on in favor of the needs of the one, that you can't play the numbers game and just sacrifice one person to save many others, And I think Spider-Man is very much a character in that mold. So unless there is additional complexities or layers that are revealed in the next movie, it doesn't ring quite true. This concept of thousands of spider people all trying to stop Miles because they all want him to let his father die. It doesn't ring quite true, if that makes sense.
I get that. Okay, so this is the one I might buckle up with you the most, because and maybe I'm willing to excuse it, however, for that meta contextual commentary that we talked about earlier. However, I feel kind of shortchanged, number one, by interpretations of Spider-Man, both live action and animated, that kind of diminish or don't feature his scientific intellect and his like genius. And even recent comics have done this. We're forgetting that Peter Parker's a pretty smart guy. I'm not interested in having a pantheon debate of Marvel Universe geniuses or whatever. I do know that Peter Parker regularly outwitted and outsmarted his adversaries, when his back is up against the wall. You mentioned the Juggernaut story. So you put a caveat in that, and also I'm also kind of willing to give them a little bit of an extra runway, an extended runway to land this plane, because we don't know what's going to happen in the next film. And I kind of, just my gut intuition, something else is going to be kind of revealed in this next film, because I refuse to believe that Miles is the first voice of dissent here. So
yeah, I would not be surprised if we get some kind of flashbacks or something, that there were others. Okay, so not speculation so much as preference. It would be really fun if the one Spider-Man that they show in a flashback that sort of turned Miguel down and actually wanted to actively oppose him is the Spider-Man from the 90s series, who is like had his own multiverse event and actually fought the spot, right? And so having him pop up as somebody who was standing against Miguel would be really interesting. There is a Spider-Man who was like, so moral that in most episodes he didn't even throw a punch because he wasn't allowed to. But yeah, I think showing in flashback some Spider people literally turning him down would make a big difference, I think, for that particular issue.
I mean, listen, any chance that I get for Christopher Daniel Barnes to return to the role, that was my first introduction to Spider-Man, period. I'm here for it.
No black suited Spider-Man yells for shock or better. All right, Chris. So if you had to give this one a grade, what would you give it?
Like I said, even with these nitpicks, it's like there are so many other qualities that more than make up for our nitpicks, in my opinion, at least. I'm still giving this an A+.
I totally give it an A as well. I think this is just a fantastic movie from top to bottom. If this is the kind of stuff we get when we let Sony make really bad live action Spider-Man movies, then let them keep going.
It's almost like in Eternals. I don't know if you ever read the most recent Eternals by Kieran Gillen. Is like spoiler. It was revealed that the Eternals, they can't die, they resurrect. But when they resurrect, a human somewhere on Earth dies. So if that sacrifice, that burnt offering, if you will, is Morbius or Venom or Kraven the Hunter without the lion eyes near his nipples or whatever, or if we have like the environmentalist animal rights activist Kraven that we appear to be getting, then so be it. I saw one dumb headline the other day that Sony is doing Marvel better than. I was like, whoa. Okay, this is like Michael Jordan being on a team with a bunch of scrubs. Okay, this is okay. Just because the one franchise is great does not diminish the turdiness of the others.
Although I will say, I hope that this opens the eyes for big screen adaptations in animated style for superheroes to people, because seeing this kind of love and care put into an animated Superman movie, for example, would be next level for a Superman fan like me.
Absolutely. All right. So, what are your reactions? Your thoughts? What did we get right? What did we forget about? There's only so much we can cover in an hour-long review. Hit us up on social media at Nerd Byword on Twitter and Instagram, individually that Nerd Dave and that Nerd Chris. And when we return from our final break, we're going to hit you with 2 more nerd commendations. All right, we are back for our final segment where we recommend good stuff that we've been enjoying to you. We call it our own. All right, Dave, you're nothing if not consistent.
I'm consistent in my inconsistency. So I do love to talk about weird little things, and as I've returned frequently to the Steam Deck in my nerd commendations and the kind of things I'm doing with it as I learn the machine more and more, there is something that I wholeheartedly, with my entire being want to nerd commend. And that is a little program that you can install on your Steam Deck called Greenlight. As Chris and I have discussed previously, I'm a toddler dad right now. My toddler really doesn't watch TV. He's kind of a difficult little guy. And so finding time for me to sit down and literally sit in front of the TV and play my Xbox One is absolutely impossible. However, the Steam Deck has sort of brought gaming back to my world a little bit. I've been, for the most part, playing, native Steam games, PC games on it, until I came across Greenlight. Now, Greenlight is not some kind of official piece of software. It's developed by some fans. It's an open source client for xCloud and Xbox home streaming. So what this means is that you can install this Greenlight program on your Steam Deck, and then you can connect your Steam Deck to your Xbox, and you can play your Xbox games. They actually are playing on your Xbox, but the image is streamed to your Steam Deck, and you're basically using your Steam Deck to play your Xbox games. And I'm going to tell you, man, this is so perfect and so near flawless. It's incredible that this is actually still a beta release. It's completely opened up Xbox gaming to me again. I actually let my Xbox Game Pass subscription lapse because I just never had the time to play any Xbox games. And now I'm back in Game Pass. I'm downloading and installing games on my Xbox so I can play them via the Steam Deck, because it's so easy for me, to whip out the Steam Deck, to connect to my Xbox. The whole process takes maybe 30 seconds from the moment I push the on button on my Steam Deck, and I'm in, and I'm playing games from my Xbox. And it was really cool because you're running the game externally on your Xbox and it's just streaming to your Steam Deck. It absolutely is incredible for the battery life of the Steam Deck. I can play a fairly high-end Steam game on there and get about 2.5 hours of battery life. And you can easily double that at minimum when you're doing game streaming like that, because all of the heavy lifting is actually being done by the console. So it's flawless, man. I've very, very rarely had any issues with it. At one time, I just had to restart the Greenlight program to get things rolling again. But other than that, like the quality is incredible. I perceive very little lag, even for giggles, although you know that I'm not exactly happy with it. I went on Overwatch 2 and I played around on it just to see how it would handle streaming, a game that is actually an online competitive game. And if I can play online competitive games like this as well. And it's flawless, man. Like input lag, I detect none with my layman's eyes. So this is, for me, the definite way of doing game streaming from an Xbox to a Steam Deck. Holy crap, man, I got like 500 games on my Xbox and I can actually play them again. It's absolutely incredible, the kind of stuff that you can get on your Steam Deck, man.
And especially with the advent of everything that Xbox revealed here recently, which I neglected to make my news story. The upcoming Fable game looks amazing. Starfield looks great. The FPS brats can go fall in a ditch somewhere. I don't care about you. But everything that's coming out for Xbox and Game Pass in particular, no additional cost. Like, I mean, like we're getting spoiled here, man. So it's funny to like listen to your journey, because it takes me back to when, my kids were younger, and like I remember, being so strategic about my daughter's nap time so I could go play Mario Kart Wii, and just kind of planning around that. But I'm just glad that you found a path that works for you, man.
All right, so what do you have for us this week for Nerd Commendations?
All right, so I'm taking a page out of your book. You have revisited things as a nerd commendation. I'm going to do the same, because Midnight Suns was one of the best games, not just in this past year that I've played, but in recent memory. It takes characters that I love, and it really is truly ambitious and imaginative when it comes to gameplay. And like the idea of like this tactical turn-based RPG with like a card system, there's no other game like this in terms of combat. And so they recently released, they're continuing to release DLC for this. And sometimes when it comes to DLC, it's just like a singular stopgap, and here's, you do this and you do that. But the DLC for Midnight Suns has been like this cohesive release, and it's really fascinating to see. I don't remember seeing something like this. But there's like a continuing through line of Dracula and vampires, and every DLC playable character is tied into that storyline. So I'm getting to play with Deadpool, who I famously are very agnostic and ambivalent about. But the writing is really sharp and the voice acting is really good, surprisingly. So Deadpool is a pleasant surprise you have the same old shenanigans that I kind of roll my eyes at. But then you transition and you get to play with Venom as a playable character. Then you get Morbius. And then, the piece de resistance, you get to play a Storm, And so this is all part of this. It's almost like an additional game with as jam-packed as the storyline and the voice acting and the writing is, not to mention the gameplay and the cutscenes. Like, everything is just this whole cohesive unit with this DLC that it truly feels like an additional game. And I'm very glad that I ponied up and paid for the complete edition, that all this stuff came with it and that was included, which I don't normally do, but like Marvel characters, that's my kryptonite, if you will. And so this is, it's a toss up for me, not to put the cart before the horse, not to spoil a future episode, but when it comes to Game of the Year, Marvel Snap and Midnight Suns, like it's honestly a toss up between the two of them for Game of the Year for me. Like, this is not only the Game of the Year for me, maybe, God, Marvel Snap too. I'm so torn. They really have they have changed a whole lot when it comes to gaming for me, and I could not be happier with my purchase. So Midnight Suns, play this game, go get this game, get the complete edition or whatever. If you're a big fan of costumes, there's no shortage of outfits. The character customization is great again. And then this DLC, it really packs a punch.
Well, very clearly, I'm going to have to give this a shot. Now that I actually can do some gaming again, because you speak of it so glowingly, and I trust your judgment when it comes to this kind of thing. So I'm going to definitely check this one out, man.
All right, that wraps up another episode of the Nerd Byword. Thank you so much for riding along with us. If you would be so kind as to go to your favorite podcasting platform, rate, review, and subscribe so you don't miss an episode. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or nerdbyword.com.
And you can find us on social media and discuss with us your feelings about the various things we nerd commend, or the nerd news stories we have presented to you this week, or even Into the Spider-Verse and how you felt about the movie. So find us on Twitter and Instagram at Nerd Byword, or individually at That Nerd Dave and at That Nerd Kris.
And as always, stay well and stay nerdy.
The Nerd Byword is written and produced by Kris and Dave, two nerds with a love of all things pop culture. The podcast features music by Al Jimenez, with additional drops composed by Joe Biondi. Our show art is by Ashery Design. Find us at nerdbyword.com and wherever podcasts are available.